Hi, this is Mrs. Skelton and Mrs. Forson with our science lesson for the day.
And we are going to continue on with our ecosystems and life science. And just a reminder, we want to talk to you about identifying the biotic and abiotic elements within an ecosystem and describing how biotic and abiotic elements within biomes are connected.
Further, we want to think about this as the real world, because in the real world, we use thinking and modeling to explain phenomena in our world.
So we have this picture here, and we've asked you the question about what are the non-living parts of an ecosystem. So Mrs. Skelton, let's just have a conversation about what we're seeing in this picture as the non-living parts of the ecosystem.
I think the first piece that really caught my eye was the beautiful water that the cat is drinking from. It was just like a little mirror, but there again, what is life without water?
And when I look at this picture, I see the nice, bright, like kind of scenery-wise, and it makes me just feel good and happy. And I can almost feel that sun pounding down and being blocked out by that canopy of the rainforest trees where that jaguar is located. And so that sunlight beaming through those trees is another essential part of our ecosystem, because without the sunlight, we wouldn't have warmth and we wouldn't have light.
And one thing that really caught my eye too is that I love that the jaguar is standing on a downed log, probably rotting. Hey, it's still biotic. It once was a living thing.
And then we can't forget about, the abiotic factor of air and the fact that we have the carbon dioxide and oxygen and nitrogen and argon and all those other gases that are out there that we can't see, just floating around in space.
Nice.
So let's go ahead and move on to our next slide here on the non-living components of an ecosystem. And the other day we talked to you about the sun, and we talked to you about climate and about temperature. But today we want to go ahead and further that and really dig deeper into each one of those components.
Now, on the sun, we know that the sun is the source of almost all of the energy on Earth. And if you remember when we were talking about atmosphere, we talked about how much energy was coming from the sun and how much our Earth absorbed. It not only provides the warmth and light that we enjoy, but many of our plants use sunlight to make their food. And climate, well, climate describes average weather conditions in an area over time. That there again, we have already been over that definition once before. Climate conditions include temperature, moisture, wind, and gosh darn, we have really experienced some climate conditions here lately. Temperature, moisture, wind, warm, cold, gosh darn. Temperature influences where organisms can live or survive. Lucky for us, we live in heated homes because there's not many of us who could survive some of the cold temperatures we get in Ohio. And temperatures around the Earth, they just really vary greatly from place to place.
That's a good point. And Mrs. Skelton, I think maybe now would be a good time to bring up the fact that in zoos, when we see, we live an hour away from one of the best zoos in the nation, and those animals are brought in from all over the place, and we know that they can't technically survive in Ohio weather, but they are controlling the climate in their exhibits in order for it to make it habitable for those animals.
Oh, absolutely. Now, some of the animals do enjoy the cooler temperatures, but they have to, at our zoo in Columbus, provide a place where they can get warm. If that's not their natural ecosystem that they normally survive in, they've got to have a place to go. They don't enjoy Ohio weather. If you're from the Sahara Desert, it's probably highly unlikely that as a species you're going to live in Ohio.
Right. And so, when you go over for wildlife, that's why you don't see many of the animals out, and that's because they're in their controlled environments. And even though on a regular day when you can go into the gorilla house and see those animals. When you go in the middle of December or January or February, you're not allowed in the gorilla house, and that's because the door, just opening it, can change their climate or the temperature in there just enough to make those gorillas pretty sick. And so there's another example of just varying temperatures within climates. So, ecosystems within ecosystems.
You got it. You got it. Let's go on to our next slide because most everybody else has had the notes so far. We want to talk about our atmosphere. We live in a mostly nitrogen and oxygen atmosphere. And water, H2O, you remember that from 6th grade, guys? I know you got to remember that. We talked about it a lot. We even modeled the molecules for H2O. So we need to talk about those two abiotic factors because guess what? They're extremely important.
So let's break it down. Water. And we covered the water cycle when we went through weather. Remember, all life on Earth is going to require water. And most organisms are going to be made mostly of it. And all organisms need water for important life processes, such as growing and reproducing and hydration and just, daily life. And every ecosystem must contain some kind of water to support it. And remember, water, it just never goes away. It's just always here, and it's in some stage or another.
And this is really important because I did have a student ask me about a desert, and they said, well, deserts don't have water. Oh, yeah, they do. They have some water at some point. And a lot of times, the specific plant life will bloom and grow during their brief rain period. But there has to be water in the desert for desert life to survive. And those plants and those animals have adapted to that lower amount of water. But there's water there.
There's definitely water there. And just because you can't see it, remember, it could be in that stage of condensation or evaporation. And we take for granted that in Ohio, we see all of the stages of the water cycle quite often, where other places and other ecosystems don't see it as frequently in all the stages of the water cycle. So that brings up to atmosphere, and we're pretty lucky here on Earth because we have an atmosphere which makes it able for us to live here. So the atmosphere is that layer of gases that surround the Earth, and you remember it goes out for kilometers and kilometers and kilometers, and once you leave the atmosphere, you're in space. So it's just like this nice envelope that protects us and keeps us safe from the harmful rays of the sun. But the best part of the atmosphere, though, is it gives us oxygen, which completely makes us different from the other planets that are out there.
Absolutely. And when we talk about Mars, which we will talk about Mars, we will talk about atmosphere. Again, our life and our plant life, our animal life, the things that live on Earth, they're dependent on the type of atmosphere we have and the things that our atmosphere does for us. So protecting us from that radiation, providing us oxygen so that our bodies can function, it's really important. Soil is my favorite thing. And if you don't recognize this as soil, and I know that those of you who got to go to Kirkmont, Mrs. Hawkins did go show you some layers of soil after I talked to her. It was wonderful. She really enjoyed it. But let's talk a little bit about soil because I think it's an abiotic factor that people really take for granted. Last year in 6th grade, we learned when I had all the 6th graders that when they were at Kirkmont, we covered the fact that we were losing our soil at a very rapid rate and that we cannot sustain life on this earth without soil. And soil, which is made up of bits of rock, water, air, minerals, and the remains of once living things. So it is abiotic, but it's got a little biotic in there because once living things do exist in the soil. It provides water and nutrients for plants that we eat and a home for many organisms such as insects, bacteria, and fungi. Factors such as water, soil texture, and the amount of available nutrients affect the types of organism that can live in the soil. Bacteria break down dead plants and animals, returning nutrients to the soil. I want to go back to those the type of soil that you have. Deserts have a very particular type of soil, and so only certain plants and animals can live because of the soil that's there. But in Ohio, we have some very rich soil, so we have a lot of farming that goes on around Ohio, and a lot of companies that are major farming companies like Dole that use Ohio because we've got such great soil for farming.
And we have different unique trees that grow in our area compared to other areas, and that is because of our soil. It's because we need a certain composition to hold the roots in. And you can kind of tell, soil is one of those great things, it's more than just dirt out there. Like going from, 1 yard to another and just digging holes, and our soil can vary greatly between just different yards and knowing what was living there and what was not.
Right, and I know that some of you live near farms or on farms in our school district, and some of you have talked to me about the different plants that your parents plant when they farm. I know I had a student last year who was talking about the fact that Dad had to rotate the crops because he didn't want the plants to deplete the soil. So he rotated between corn and soybeans. That way it helped to balance out the soil, and he was able to maintain that real quality soil. That made production on the farm really good. You got to think about those things. Kind of take that for granted.
Right. So guys, that is our non-living factors in our ecosystems. And remember, those non-living things are called abiotic, and abiotic are those things that are never alive. They're never, ever, ever going to be alive, but they are very vital to our everyday lives, and they're very vital to our ecosystems. And therefore, we need to make sure we're protecting those and keeping them safe. So my question to you guys today is, how important are abiotic factors, and how are we using them in the real world, or maybe how are we depleting them in the real world? And why is that going to be a problem, or why is that a benefit?
Yeah, and just to recap on that, we've got sun, atmosphere, water, soil, and what did I miss? I only named 4. There's 5 of them. Climate. Yes, climate. It's really funny when you're sitting there going through them, you're like, okay, what did I say? But there were 5 of them that we talked about. Think about this: soil, climate, water, atmosphere, sunlight. How do they interact with the way we live on Earth? And what happens when we deplete or destroy them?
Very nice. Well, Mrs. Skelton, I will see you another day, and we will bring another podcast at another time.
Hey, thanks for listening, guys.
See you later.